overseas or interstate. We received 10 nominations for Academy Awards in 2011 across 8 categories. And you'll be more familiar with that than I will be. And some of our major performing arts companies are absolutely considered to be world's best practice and of world standard. So we ask what's missing. I think the pieces are there. I think there's some good information. As someone who is relatively new to the art side of things, other than as an observer and you know, someone who's enjoyed it, I think it is a little bit ad hoc, and a key priority for the Office for the Arts is to increase our ability to be able to tell that story in a coherent and strong, comprehensive case, to improve the quality of our economic data and to improve the evidence that the interventions that we support and are looking to support are going to make a difference, and also improve our ability to benchmark our elite organisations and ourselves against the world's best, to be able to show what we know, that we are of best practice. I think the creative industries are far ahead of other parts of the broader, you know, cultural sector, if you like. It's an interesting place. Modern policy development for government is extremely complex, and excellent policy requires a breadth of thinking across sectors, across silos. Malcolm referred to that earlier. And this is recognised by most governments. States and territory departments have certainly changed their structures recently. The UK, I think, were leaders in this about a bit more than a decade ago, in trying to get that convergence of policy and far greater coordination as policy becomes more and more complex. It's a major feature of the public sector reforms in Canberra and the Commonwealth. It's part of the recent blueprint on reform called Ahead of the Game. And that highlights what good practice is. But the key thing is, the biggest risk in all of this is the risk of being passive. Regardless of the structures, I think it's incumbent on us in the Office for the Arts to insert ourselves, sometimes to make a nuisance of ourselves, but to insert ourselves in the middle of the policy discussions of those around us. Being in the Prime Minister's portfolio with a very senior minister is really helpful, but in itself it's not enough. We've got to be really proactive. Someone asked a question at the end of Terry's presentation: do politicians understand the link between culture, creativity and the economy? I can assure you some do, but I think the real question is, are they equipped with the coherent evidence base that ties it in to some of the fundamental priorities that the government's facing? I think perhaps not. I think it is incumbent on us, the bureaucrats, the industry, the academics, to come up with a pragmatic body of information that allows that story to be told, potentially with greater clarity. That's part of the challenge, but there's also another part of the challenge. If we are truly going to be in a position to have great policy convergence, we need to ensure that what we do, what we develop and what we nurture reflects the needs, the values and the aspirations of a 21st century Australia. We have the potential to be a little bit in front, to be leading some of the debates about what it is that 21st century Australia stands for. The creative industries are not uniquely positioned, but they are especially positioned to do that. It is because Australia is a very different country to what we were 20 years ago. Our population composition, the technological opportunities, our international standing, how we view ourselves in the world and how the world views us, should all influence our creative and our cultural agenda, and it is quite different to where we were 20 years ago. You know, for example, we've got great diversity in our population. 43% of people living in Australia are either born overseas or have a parent who was. Technology's given us absolutely significant opportunities that were only a glimmer in people's eyes a couple of decades ago, to improve access, to change the way we tell our stories, to change how we create and what we create. We know that internet access in households is absolutely enormous and significant. We've got the statistics about the number of young people who use IT and the internet and other emerging technologies to create and access art and to create. Yeah, I also think that the preconditions are there in Australia as well for a really strong focus on creativity and culture. Our educational attainment is of, world's best standard, I would imagine. Our relative wealth is very high. Our economy is strong, particularly relatively speaking, and we are a confident and diverse nation. And if we ensure that our creative and artistic pursuits optimise all those things I talked about earlier, then there is no reason why our agenda not just underpin broader government objectives, but also take a leadership role in it as well. And that is occurring in some places. The Office for the Arts, we're looking forward to playing a strong role in the Convergence review. We'll be advocating for a strong policy that supports Australian content. Similarly, we're heavily involved in the review of the classification scheme. And we've got our own reviews that we're running out of the office, including a review that Harold Mitchell is undertaking into philanthropy and private sector support for the arts, to identify and to make recommendations about what are the inhibitions to making philanthropy easier, more intuitive, and a more fundamental part of the way that we look at our cultural sector. And I think there is greater opportunities also in the future to drive home the policy convergence. The NBN and the digital economy, Malcolm's already mentioned it. I've got a very strong view that we need to move soon to ensure quality Australian content, and that the opportunities of the broadband network will not be optimised if we don't foster local content, because it has the potential to be filled by culturally unnutritious, if you like, material from other places. And this can be realised in digital content, including from our cultural institutions. It's not about digitising our national collections. It is about developing knowledge transfer ability. And the knowledge transfer ability for the 21st century requires digitisation. We need to reframe how we're arguing amongst ourselves in Canberra, but also with others about it. It is much more than just preserving our information. It's about providing access to our cultural heritage for people who don't visit Canberra. There's lots of examples about how some of the major performing arts companies are optimising the emerging technologies. I know Black Swan in WA are broadcasting some of their performances live into a number of regional theatres. Opera Australia will be having a season in Brisbane here, and they also will be broadcast into regional areas. There's other opportunities for policy convergence in terms of some of the more social policy aspirations. In terms of educational reform, arts has been identified as one of the priority streams for the national curriculum, and this is fundamental not only in building audiences of the future, but also in giving people a far greater understanding about the value that the arts can play. We do know that a creative nation creates tolerance, and these are all broader elements of what we're aspiring to. It can support our innovation agenda through the work of the creative industries, film technologies, computer games. It's already playing a role, and it can play a greater role as well in closing the gap. Our Indigenous art centres, for example, are creating local economies and assisting employ a number of people. Arts and creativity, in recognising and promoting the multicultural society we are, we can make sure that the needs and interests of our diverse population can be built, can be supported and build improved understanding. Simon Crean has said on a number of occasions that a creative nation is a tolerant nation. And I think that's something that we can do through this policy convergence approach. And there's so much more. It can support our diplomatic agenda, our partnerships with the private sector, can support tourism. The list is endless. I see true policy convergence can see the arts, culture and creativity seen to be fundamental elements of each of these parts of our economy and our social policy objectives. But there is the caveat, and they're the key points that I wanted to to leave with you, is that true policy convergence is an essential aspect of optimising how we support arts and creativity, and how we support it and what we support. and that is because creativity in the arts can underpin our broader national objectives as well as have its own intrinsic value. But I maintain that we must earn the right to be able to be considered and be given this opportunity through several means. One of them is to make sure that we've got the evidence base to demonstrate that our activity makes a difference and that it is presented in a coherent and pragmatic manner. And the second part of it is to ensure that what we do reflects the values, needs and opportunities of a 21st century Australia. Prime Minister and the Minister Crean have forecast that we will be releasing a cultural policy, the first in almost 20 years. The discussions and the consultation processes around that will be announced very shortly, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities for people to be given a chance to frame it. But a key and core part of it must be how we work across different agendas for policy convergence at its most pure.
You might want to stand back if you encourage you to have words.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Richard and Malcolm. I feel like I'm very much among friends being back here at QUT, and it's great to have this opportunity provided by the CCI today. I'm speaking about the... Speaking about the National Classification Review, which I commenced involvement with in April of this year. Someone who I have worked here, when I saw them recently, asked me, does that mean that I'm the head censor? Which I thought was an interesting way to put it. I have attended a session on classification enforcement and will be getting my classification training on Tuesday, so if you want to, for instance, discuss the 6 fetishes with me, by all means do, but that won't be the focus of today's presentation. The area of classification, while we've had a variety of reviews of different elements of it, a comprehensive review has not taken place for 20 years, and the last comprehensive review was in fact conducted by the Australian Law Reform Commission, which is an example of what Malcolm described as a third type of government organisation that is funded through the Attorney General's Department but is an independent statutory authority, so we develop our own conclusions and present those into the political domain for debate. It conducted its review in 1991, led to the Classification Act being passed in 1995. Now, of course, much has changed since 1995, but probably the simplest summary of the changes since that period can be said in 2 words: the internet. We have a rapid pace of technological change, community uptake of new media. 72% of Australian households now have access to high-speed broadband. That will be about 90% by 2014, and that broadband will be faster. About 90% of Australians aged 12 to 17 are regular internet users, and so on. So this presents us with major changes in community needs and expectations in this evolving technological environment. And it's important to note in our terms of reference that we're given a specific remit to consider the development of strong Australian digital content and distribution industries, the need to reduce the regulatory burden, and consideration of the scope of the industry subject to classification in terms of their potential for growth. So our focus is one that's forward-looking. It's about developing a framework for the next 10 to 20 years. And while it does include elements such as consideration of the impact of different media on children and maintaining community standards, it also has that growth and convergence remit. And in our terms of reference, we're also required to consider the very complex nature that Australian federalism has given us in terms of state and Commonwealth responsibilities in these fields. And some of you may be aware from last week, the Standing Committee of Attorneys General meeting, or the